Hello and welcome back into the show. This is Blackstone Joe. We're coming at you with the July 20th edition. This is going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about E85, and that's kind of by popular demand. We've had multiple requests to kind of go over E85 and how it can affect engines and what kind of results we might find in testing. So we're excited to get to that. But before we do, we have another Catchpan segment. This is where we pull interesting questions that have been sent along from listeners or just Blackstone customers, and maybe we found a place for these questions in the show. Usually we're going to pick questions that we can kind of answer rather full stop, definitive, quick hitters. Because the topics are growing in terms of the length of time needed to address them. And keep sending your questions in. If we don't answer them right away, like with the next episode, don't think we've put them by the wayside. To be honest, some of the questions we've got kind of require more than just a Catchpan segment. They might require a full show. So we're keeping these things in mind and just kind of attacking the areas that we can when they're readily available. But for this Catchpan segment, we had some great questions I think a lot of folks have probably wondered, and so they're naturally a great fit for the show. These come from our friend Jim. So first off, what do you do with all of the white oil sample containers after you've emptied them? Do you reuse them, recycle them? So the sample bottles, I'm not referring to the black mailers. I'm talking about the sample bottles that you actually put the oil into. We do, in fact, recycle them. Reusing them would be quite I'm not sure how to describe it, just very involved process. It would take quite a bit of cleaning. The time it would take to clean them in-house would just be kind of insurmountable. So we do recycle those though. And that's something that obviously with the amount of samples we go through, it's the responsible thing to do. So that is something we will do straight up. The next question is, how about the black containers? He's referring to the mailers here. In oil absorbing material, are you able to send those out again and again? Yes, the black mailers, unless there's a problem with them, unless somehow they were damaged or they have a bunch of oil that spilled in them, we are going to resend the black mailers, because unlike the white oil containers, those are going to be very easy to clean most of the time, so we can reuse those. The absorbing material that we put in the sample within the mailer wrapped around the sample bottle, we will reuse that if we can, but as with the mailers themselves, if the absorbent material is damaged or messy because it had to do its job while the sample is in transit, something like that, then we will have to dispose of it. But otherwise, we're going to be able to reuse that. And the last and kind of most interesting question, because I didn't even know the answer to this, I had to go check with the president, Ryan Stark, at the company just to make sure. This question is, how much waste oil is collected at the lab? I bet you have a large tank that needs pumping on a regular basis. Your instincts are correct, Jim. We do. We will collect and remove 400 gallons every 6 weeks. So that is all of what we do in terms of the shipping process, our containers, our mailers, the absorbent material, the oil itself. We really do try and get the most out of everything, and if recycling or repurposing is a possibility, then we will do that every time. So now I want to switch gears to this. E85 and how it impacts engines. So before we get too far into the topic, I want to give a shout out to customer and friend of the program, Nishan. You can actually find his YouTube channel. I'd recommend you all check it out because he has a lot of cool videos. The reason he has a lot of cool videos is he runs his own shop. Nishan is an EFI tuner who offers engine management calibration services for multiple vehicle and engine platforms utilizing OEM ECUs or standalone engine management systems. He's been at it since 2011, and in that span of time, He's had a lot of experience with cars running E85 and certain issues that can pop up while doing so. And Nissan even has a real world example. He brought up his 2018 Mustang GT, and he mentions that he tends to have a normal viscosity without E85, but when running only E85, tends to have a low viscosity, and his TBN value tends to be a bit lower as well. So that all kind of leads into the question, which kind of surrounds the popular thought, which is that you should change the oil more frequently if the engine is running E85. And Nissan's looking for a little bit of our input on this, what we've seen, and it only made sense to cover this because we've had this come up really pretty commonly. A lot of folks are curious about E85, and Nissan attached an article from the Royal Society of Chemistry, specifically focusing on the effects of E85. I'm going to focus here on our lab, what we can find, what we can speak to. If you're interested in that article, I can certainly send it your way. Just hit my line, email us at bstone@blackstone-labs.com. In addition to this article, there's a lot of good scholarly research on this. I just want to focus on specifically our testing. That's the ground I can stand on. I'm sure it would be fun to offer commentary on just anyone's opinion. But in order to give you the most factually based analysis from our building, I'm just going to stick to our testing and what it can show. So what we find quite often is E85 will be mentioned by owners generally running smaller turbocharged engines. Think of things like Subaru's F820 or maybe the 2.0 liter that you'll find powering Scion FRSs. We'll see E85 brought up fairly regularly, especially in cars like that. And what I wanted to do to speak to Nissan's question about engines that should be changing their oil sooner based on whether or not they're running E85, well, I wanted to pull samples where customers had mentioned E85, where it kind of prompted us to speak to it in the comment. Something of a keyword search, to be quite honest with you, because there's no way to definitively pull every sample where customers were using E85, and here's why. People were kind of lucky to know a lot of background on cars because people are kind of, we talked about this in past episodes. People tend to be a little shy about details on their cars, and maybe that's because they're not familiar with what we need to know, and maybe that's because they don't want to disclose everything. But within that, there will be a lot of instances where people are running E85 and might not even tell us. And there are going to be instances where we're going to find out down the line. There are also going to be instances where E85 is in use, but it's accompanied by other things that could be playing a role in the results. So there's no way to do like a definitive, what some might expect, a study, one that would be done by a research laboratory. There's no way to go to that length. But what we can do is reference samples where folks mentioned E85, want us to speak to it. And I was able to find 338 samples where E85 was a focal point in the report, be it because the customer asked us to speak on it or because it prompted us to speak on it. And only 39 out of these 338 samples had a low viscosity. And I think that's interesting. So E85, there's a common, Nissan spoke to it, there's a common idea that's going to automatically result in a lower viscosity, or maybe not technically a low reading, but a reading that's lower than what the oil would have been measured at otherwise. So this sample size right here kind of tells you that it's not really the case. And even in the cases where the viscosity was low, it wasn't necessarily because of E85. No, I think a lot of these cases, they came from engines, like I just mentioned previously, engines like the F820, smaller turbocharged engines where often we'll find a low viscosity even without E85 in use. And if you don't have E85 in use and we don't find any measurable fuel dilution, which remember we test for that in every sample just by measuring the flash point. So if you don't have any measurable fuel and the customer is not running E85 and the viscosity is still low, Well, that's usually the next likely suspect is going to be normal shearing. And engine shearing is kind of a dirty term in some circles because people have a hard time hearing the word shear. Like, shearing sounds kind of harsh, right? People hear that and they're like, this is a vicious attack of the engine oil. And yeah, I mean, if you are to break it down, it doesn't sound quote unquote good. Shearing is to put it in a quick way, the quickest way possible, shearing is described as the breakdown of viscosity improving additives. And that can cause the viscosity to measure a bit low for the grade. Probably the biggest, most famous engine shearing, I should say, engine that is known to shear the oil down would be the 6.0 liter Power Stroke. And when I say, the most known for this, it's really in our circle. I don't think that the internet might feel the same way. Internet's a dangerous place. But when it comes to our testing, we tend to find engine shearing, especially in that 6.0 liter Power Stroke. And I can pull up, I'm sure this is something that other listeners might want to go into more detail down the road, and I'd certainly be happy to. There should probably be a whole episode on engine shearing, but we will test thousands and thousands of samples from that engine type with a low viscosity, and it's really not an issue. And switching gears back to these smaller engines, these gasoline turbocharged engines, we'll find a low viscosity with nothing else out of line, and it really ends up just being something to note. And you can try to correct it. You might have luck if you try different oil or if you try certain additives like Lucas, but at the end of the day, it usually ends up being something pretty benign. But back to the idea of E85 and whether it should call for a shorter oil change. Well, even if you have a low viscosity, all right, let's say you do have a low viscosity and you are running E85. Well, I want to go to the all-important topic, which is engine wear. Are you having excess wear? Because if you're not, and you just have a slightly low viscosity, and who knows if that's definitively due to E85, but even if it is, let's look at engine wear and see how metals are trending. Are they in good shape? Are they steady? Are they steadily going up? So on and so forth. If trends do not speak to poor wear, then you don't need to shorten up the oil change interval just because you're running E85 or just because you have a low viscosity, and maybe that's due to E85, maybe not. But you don't have to just shorten the oil change interval because one thing is out of spec. No, we want to look and see how that engine is doing, how internal parts are responding, and if wear trends speak to an engine that is wearing well for its type, then I would really be hard-pressed to call for a shorter oil run. Now, we also talk about TBN values when it comes to oil change intervals, how long, how short you should be going. So we're going to be looking at that too. If you have a TBN value that is well above the 1.0 or less we consider low, you have healthy trends, then honestly, let's just keep that viscosity as something to watch down the road. Is it a consistent reading? Because if it is, then it's probably normal for your engine. It might be normal for the fuel you're running. But another impact of E85 that I can speak to a bit more definitively is that E85 can attract moisture. So more so than in samples that are just gasoline, the engine owners are just using gasoline, no E85 at all. It's pretty darn rare, honestly, to ever find water. And it's rare, too, with E85, but it happens more than it would with just gasoline. E85, by virtue of attracting moisture, we might find some water. Generally, in these cases, it's not even going to be an amount we can quantify as an exact percentage, but it can show up. So that's important because water can cause rapid oxidation. And if you have rapid oxidation, that's going to show up in testing as high in solubles. So let's just say you're switching to E85 and you want to see the effects. If you end up having water quite often, and if that water is appearing to translate to high insolubles, if the high insolubles are turning the oil abrasive and causing poor wear, then that can kind of be a whole smorgasbord of reasons that you might not want to run E85. So water is something to keep in mind. But generally, I do want to go back and say that it is still rare. I mean, it's just that it happens more often, I think, than it would with engines just running gasoline. So that is an effect to pay attention to. So now, what about the idea of switching to E85 and seeing how the engine's responding from a wear standpoint? Well, it's good to know that you're switching to E85. Good to let us know. But is there other information that might prove valuable as well? When you're getting ready to send in a sample and you're wanting to see how the engine's responding to E85, think about other things. Have you modified the engine to run E85? If the engine's modified in any particular way, especially if it's making more power than its stock counterparts, let us know that too. Because if you have steady trends and you switch to E85 and now wear is higher, well, E85 isn't necessarily the key factor. So let's say you've modified the engine, it's running E85, you're ready to do your best Dominic Toretto impersonation on the track, then I wouldn't be so quick to then send in a sample. You have E85, now wear is higher, and then you say, oh my gosh, E85, it's destroying my engine. Well, did you start going to the track and maxing out those RPMs when you weren't doing so before? When you weren't using E85? Because if you did kind of take that progression, then it's possible that there's just operational explanation besides the fuel. So the thing is to remember to tell us about things like aftermarket parts, modifications. What were you doing with the engine before? Is it the same use? Has anything changed? Because that's going to allow us to give you the most complete analysis of how the engines respond to E85 or any modification, any change. But by and large, we want to stay away from being so quick to blame the fuel type without trends, without having other information at our disposal. Because most often we find, when there's a customer using E85 and they have an increase in this, that, the other, usually there's other stuff going on. And I just think it's important to view the whole thing, all of the possible explanations together, and then kind of parse it down from there. If we can eliminate changes in use, if we can eliminate modifications, operational increases, explanations rather, for increases, and then all you have left is the 85, then I'm ready to take a more hardline stance on the impact. So in general, just to wrap it up, E85, it's not necessarily going to translate in a low viscosity. Remember, I could only find 39 of the 338 samples where folks mentioned E85 and want us to talk about it. Only 39 had a low viscosity, and even those samples, they come from engines that we often find have a low viscosity no matter what. It's just tends to be normal, maybe from shearing. So really, it's not very many. And when you break it down further, even if the viscosity is a little low, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to shorten up the oil change interval. It doesn't necessarily mean that the engine is going to struggle. Let's go to the wear levels. Let's go see how much active additive is left. Let's look at other things, because that's the beauty of the standard analysis, which it's got standard in the name, but if we're going to be real here, it's a pretty thorough overview. If we go to the rest of the standard analysis and find good things, then no, I don't think you have to shorten up the oil change interval just because you're using E85. Matter of fact, you might be able to go longer. And we're going to weigh all of that against things like engine wear, trends, how the engine is wearing on a consistent basis. So this has been fun. I think this is a topic that applies to a lot of people, and I love the fact that we've been getting so much interaction from our listeners. Our listener base has grown, and that's a credit to both consistent followers, but I also think people telling other folks about it. So please keep spreading the word about Slick Talk. And remember, if we do not include all of your questions, all of your responses to the show, it's because we're getting more and more of them, it's awesome. But that also means that certain episode ideas and whatnot are going to be pushed back. And maybe we get really good questions that are going to call for a whole other episode, which it's all very exciting for myself, my co-producer, Kyle. We put in so much work on getting this show out to you, and it's been a real labor of love. So keep it up, keep listening, and please don't forget, if you are listening on a platform that allows you to leave a rating, review, don't hesitate to drop that 5-star. Don't hesitate to drop a kind note, whatever it is, whatever you want to talk about. We'd love to hear from you. So once again, thank you. This is Blackstone Joe signing off.